Well, ladies and gentlemen, we welcome you to the first ever episode of a brand new streaming show brought to you by Fox 10. I'm Ron Hoon, and let me introduce to you John Noetzel. John is truly the brainchild behind this whole concept of the great American story. John, where did the idea first come from for you? And tell everybody what these episodes are going to be about.
Sure, Ron, thank you. I do a lot of reading. I love history. I know you do as well. I love historical shows. I love historical podcasts. Anything that deals with history, I just devour. Mm-hmm. So I got to thinking, America is so rich in history. We have so many stories, so many events, so many people, places, things that have forged America, that have forged what we are and our nation. And I thought to myself, why not create a show that tells those stories?
With a couple of guys just sitting around talking about it.
Yeah, and
right?
You know, it's a passion for both of us, so I'm like, who better to share this forum with? Mm-hmm. And so there's endless stories.
Now, was there an actual moment where you had the aha moment? Now, look, we're really big into streaming at Fox 10.
Yes. Yeah.
So we've got our streaming shows with Celeste and me every morning live at 10. We've got Ty and Anita at 11. We've got all kinds of other. We've got the Drone Zone.
Yeah.
Those guys are hilarious.
We've got some great content. Yes.
But knowing that as the background, at what moment did you say to yourself, I've got an idea here I think could really work?
You know, it had to have been while I was knee deep in some book I was reading at home. I've always got a book going at home, and which I'm sure at some point it just clicked, and I said, you know, this would be a good idea. I mean, why not?
Yes.
You know, and I think there's an appetite for it. I think people love to learn about our history and our heritage, and there's so much to be told. Some good and some bad. I mean, let's be honest. There's some dark spots in American history.
Right.
But it's made us what we are.
Yeah. Absolutely. All right. So, what is episode number one?
Episode one
all about? What's your vision
so episode
here?
One is we're going to call this one An Evening at Ford's Theater.
Okay.
I thought it appropriate, given that we are coming up on the 160th anniversary of the assassination of President Lincoln.
Right. In fact, by the time people watch this, it will have already come and gone.
Probably so.
Yes,
April 14th, 1865.
Yes. Right.
So, Good Friday.
Yeah.
Good Friday of 1865.
Right.
But I thought that let's tell the story that night and maybe share some details that people didn't know about. There's a lot of details about that night and that whole event that are pretty wild. I mean, when you dissect it and you dive deep, there are some crazy side stories, and aside from the manhunt for Booth, there are some pretty wild stories.
Well, let me start with one of mine that I just, I mean, it still gives me chills just to think about it. But here's Abraham Lincoln, who I think always knew that it was a real possibility that he might not make it through his presidency.
Yeah.
Of course, he had served his first 4 years.
Yes.
They had the kind of the military successes there during the Civil War. That launched at some point here. I think he thought he was not even going to win re-election, but then there was the Battle of Atlanta, and it was really a dagger to the Confederacy deep in the South, and then famously Sherman's March to the Sea, and showing that at that point Union forces could not be stopped deep in the heart of the presidency, and all of a sudden his political fortunes turned around. It's kind of interesting to think that if it hadn't been for those couple of events, militarily speaking, then he might not have won re-election and would have just gone back off to live a long and happy life as a lawyer in Springfield, Illinois.
Yeah. That's something.
But instead, the country called upon him to serve 4 more years. He just never got that chance. But to me, John, that story that is told from 3 days before he was actually shot, where he has this dream.
Yes.
And he's wandering around the White House. He can hear sobs in the distance, and so he walks down into the East Room, you know, the very room that we still know today as the major room in the White House where big public events happen. And as he walks in, the crying and the sobbing is no longer muffled, it's much louder, and so he sees the coffin there, and he walks up to, there have been some men called upon to guard the body, and he walks up to a soldier, and he says, "Who has died at the White House?" And the soldier said to him, "It was the president. He was assassinated."
Yeah.
And this is 3 days before it actually happened.
How haunting is that?
It's so haunting. Right?
There's a lot of that kind of mysterious, there's that aura around that whole event.
Right.
You know?
Yes.
You know, the night of that assassination, he went reluctantly.
Right.
He was supposed to go with General Grant.
Right.
General Grant didn't want to go because he didn't get along with Mary Lincoln.
Not very many people did get along with Mary Lincoln.
Yeah. As
I've read about it, I guess she wasn't the easiest person to get along with.
Even his son turned him down.
Okay.
So Lincoln's going to this play reluctantly. First off, he ends up going with a major from the Union Army and his fiancée, Henry Rathbone and Clara Harris, which that's another story will blow your mind. But so he's there reluctantly, and you know, we go back to the kind of the mysterious things that kind of led up to this.
Right.
Did you know that Lincoln had an encounter with Booth at a previous play in Ford's Theater where Booth singled the president out and actually pointed his finger at him, and I'm not sure what was said, but so there was a previous encounter. It's crazy.
Well, those were the celebrities of that time, right? I mean, there was no People Magazine or Us Weekly.
That's right.
There was no Page 6 from the New York Post. In fact, there weren't even movies. Hollywood really didn't even exist. But what we do know is that the actors of stage and screen were the major celebrities of the time.
Yeah.
And Booth was a very prominent, well-known star in America.
He was.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. Very well known. I mean, he would have been recognized.
Right.
You know, people would have known him.
Right. And so then there's this, we can't really call it a confrontation.
No.
Because it seems like it was mostly one-sided. Here's Booth calling out the president. And I also read in the book Manhunt, which I know we're going to be talking about, the 12-day hunt.
Yes.
For Booth, but that Booth and a couple of others of his friends had attended kind of an impromptu speech that Lincoln gave from the White House right at the ending of the war. Remember, it ended there at the Appomattox Courthouse.
Yes, correct.
In Virginia, and then the word came up to Washington, and people just thronged to the White House, and they were hoping the president would speak, which he did, and Booth was there. He was such a Confederate sympathizer that he was just overcome with hatred for the president, and I think he had probably, unfortunately, been thinking about some sort of an act like this for a long time.
Well, believe it or not, the original plan was to kidnap Lincoln. It was not to assassinate him. It wasn't until after the surrender at Appomattox that Booth, the switch went on Booth, where it was okay. Now it's an assassination plot. So yeah, this got really dark very quickly.
Yeah.
But as we go back to that night, there are some things that are really just crazy wild. First off, you know, a lot of people may wonder, well, did Lincoln have security?
Yeah, what about that?
Well, the Secret Service had not been invented yet. They actually had a Secret Service, but it wasn't for the president. The Secret
Correct.
Service actually was for counterfeit currency. It was to
Right.
track counterfeit currency.
Yes.
So
Sort of the effective version of the Secret Service back in those days was one guy named Alan Pinkerton.
yeah,
Right?
Yeah.
Of the famous Pinkerton Detective Agency.
Right.
Right?
exactly. So they had detail for him, but not the Secret Service.
Yeah.
But one of the craziest stories about that night is the person assigned to guard Lincoln. He was, first off, he left the theater at intermission and went across the street to the bar.
Okay.
Okay, so he's over at the bar, and his name was I want to make sure I get this right. His name was John Parker.
Okay.
Okay, so he's over at the bar.
Yeah.
He moved his seat in the theater because he couldn't see the stage. So originally his seat was behind Lincoln,
Yeah.
to where he could protect Lincoln.
Right.
He moved his seat. So it's not known if he came back from the bar after intermission.
Yeah.
But had he come back, if he was in fact back, he was sitting in another seat, the wrong seat. This guy's resume was horrible. And I want to read you something from the Smithsonian Magazine. They did a whole article on this guy.
Okay.
But John Parker's record as a cop, because he was a cop before he was scheduled to guard Lincoln,
Okay.
it fell somewhere between pathetic and comical. He was hauled before the police board numerous times,
Okay.
facing a smorgasbord of charges that should have gotten him fired. But he received nothing more than occasional reprimand. His infractions included conduct unbecoming an officer, using intemperate language, and being drunk on duty. Charged with sleeping on a streetcar when he was supposed to be walking his beat.
This guy.
Parker declared he heard ducks quacking on a tram and had climbed aboard to investigate. The charge was dismissed when he was brought before the board for frequenting a whorehouse. Parker argued that the proprietress had sent for him. This guy was the wrong guy.
Yes,
Okay, so
right.
you've got that. So you've another story that night that just,
Yeah, it is.
the odds are stacking up against Lincoln. Like,
I know.
You
There
know,
were so many what ifs and what could have been.
absolutely.
We're going to take it to the break right
Yes.
now with a question.
Yep.
What skill did Abraham Lincoln have that he demonstrated to his friends and colleagues? A, play the pretty mean harmonica. B, mimicking the bird calls. Or C, as an axe thrower. Think about it at home. We'll be back in 2 minutes. And so we welcome you back here to the Great American Story. This is our very first episode. I'm Ron Hoon, along with John Noetzel, here from Fox 10, and we've been thinking a little bit about this question. What skill did he have that he occasionally demonstrated to his friends and colleagues? So,
What do you think, Ron? I know the answer, so I don't,
Yeah.
I'll let you.
I have a feeling that I know he was a wrestler. I think that axe throwing is something that I think he was a wrestler. So I'm going to say playing the harmonica.
Okay.
What do you?
Well, it's actually mimicking bird calls. Apparently, he could mimic bird calls.
Is
He's a
that so?
multi-talented guy, man. I
Okay.
mean, yeah.
Well, I visualized him sitting around the campfire. You know, he was what they called a circuit attorney.
Yeah.
He would work the circuit, whether you had these judges in various counties, whether it's Sangamon County there in Illinois or et cetera, and he would just, kind of travel from courthouse to courthouse and see who needed some help.
Sure.
Right?
Sure.
And so I could just visualize him sitting around the campfire. So let's get back to our story.
Back to the night of the assassination, April 14th,
Right.
1865.
Oh, and by the way,
Yeah.
so I was just in Washington with my grandkids a
Sure.
few weeks ago, and I learned something really interesting because I remember from when I was a youngster and we took a family trip to Washington and we went to Ford's Theater, which, by the way, after the assassination, it was closed up tight.
It was.
Nobody went back. It was considered haunted.
That's right.
And nobody went back into that theater for decades.
The government
it sat
actually
there
bought
empty.
it. Yeah, the government actually bought it, and it became a federal office space until, I want to say, 1932.
Right.
And then became a museum.
Okay.
Maybe. I have my notes here. It was a federal records building until 1932, and then a museum until 1968.
Yeah.
And now it's still a working theater.
Yes,
And
right.
a historical site.
Yeah.
So crazy. But anyway.
What I was going to say
Yes.
is, I remember as a youngster, you could actually, there was just that little kind of flimsy door that you could walk through, just a tiny little hallway, and then you're right there in the booth.
Yes.
But the day that I was there here just not too long ago with the grandkids, it was closed up. The door was locked. Of course, I rattled it.
Of course.
Like, let me in.
Yes.
I want to be able to show them. So I actually went up to one of the guides there, and here's what he told me, and this is something for you to keep in mind if you're ever going to be visiting. He said, on the days when it looks like we're going to be kind of overrun with tourists, we just close it up.
Oh.
He said, so today it's closed. We have a bunch of tour groups coming in.
Interesting.
So it was a lot of school groups, that kind of a thing. He said, but there are days when it appears that it's going to be nice and quiet, that we will open it up and you can actually literally walk into that booth. So probably, if you want to be able to have that experience, probably don't go at the height of summer or on a busy weekend.
I got lucky when I went.
Okay.
Apparently, because I was able to get into the booth.
Ooh,
so
wow.
It is something to behold. It really, truly is.
Yeah.
And as we go back to that night, and we spoke of Major Henry Rathbone and his fiancée who were there. Major Rathbone apparently tussled with Booth when Booth came to the box and shot Lincoln.
Yeah.
And
which he probably felt safe about because that was a single shot gun that he used.
That's correct. Yes.
It's, not like it was a six-shooter, like you might have seen in the Old West, that kind of a thing. And I'm sure he was dealing with just the immediate reaction that anybody would have to try to wrestle the killer down. But of course, Booth had a plot to get away, and that was jumping down onto the stage below.
That's right.
But so Rathbone did immediately act, I think, the way a lot of us would.
And Rathbone, I believe, was injured as well. And it's interesting. There is, in the New York Historical Museum, Clara Harris, his fiancée, actually penned a letter to her friend about that evening that you can actually read. But so he, from the accounts, he grabbed Booth's coat. Booth obviously jumped over, landed, broke his leg or whatever. But interestingly enough, and not to go off on too much of a tangent here,
which we might have a tendency to do here on the program.
Well, especially with this story too, because this story is so crazy. But Major Rathbone never got over that assassination, and in fact, tragically, he killed his then wife, Clara Harris, who became his wife. Later in life, he actually shot her and went after his own family. He was declared insane and ended up, I believe he passed in, I don't have the exact date, but he ended up spending his days in an asylum.
Wow.
Maybe it was PTSD, I don't know, but I imagine that rocked his world to the point where he just couldn't function anymore, obviously. So another dark chapter of that night. So many things happened that night that just, the ripple effect is just crazy.
And I do think that, just think about this for instance, I love those what if kind of historical perspectives. What if he'd been able to just tackle Booth and hold him down until 2 or 3 other people, as you had already pointed out, the guard is like, where's the guard? But people suddenly were screaming in the theater. What if he'd been able to hold him down? It would have prevented that whole manhunt from happening. I mean, here's Booth who jumps out of the booth, down onto the stage. I believe it's a spur on his boot that catches in the flag. They have the bunting there, and that was what tripped him up and caused him to land awkwardly and get the broken leg. He had a friend, an accomplice, waiting for him with a horse.
That's right.
At the backstage door. and thus began that 12-day manhunt we talked about a little earlier in this half hour, just about that book, Manhunt, which I mean, you know how it's all going to end.
Yeah.
It doesn't end well for Booth, we can tell you that.
That's a great plug.
I mean, a fire.
Yep.
But just the way it originally transpired, you know, may not have needed to happen, but he did. We'll just point out one quick little story, John.
Yeah.
I was visiting, I've got some relatives who live in Maryland, who I think they said they're only about 15, 20 minutes down the road from Dr. Mudd's house.
No kidding.
Yeah.
Yes.
And so apparently it's still in the family.
Wow.
And you can occasionally go in. It's
No
not like
kidding.
it's a 365 tourist location. But, you know, Dr. Mudd,
Sure.
this is who Booth went to as part of his escape to try to get his
That's right.
broken leg fixed,
That's
which is
right.
what Mudd did.
That's right.
He avoided the execution that was awaiting for all the plotters in the
He
assassination.
did.
But he was actually given a life in prison sentence. But did you know that Andrew Johnson, who would become president, pardoned him
No kidding.
4 years later?
How about that?
How about that? I believe it was 4 years later, right in that time frame, because he was still a kind of he wanted to be a helpful doctor, even though he was serving life in prison, talking about this Dr. Mudd. And he helped with a massive yellow fever outbreak. And the nation was so grateful that Andrew Johnson decided, I'm going to pardon him. He served a grand total of 4 years
That is
in
something
prison,
else.
and then he was a free man
How about
once
that?
again. Yeah.
See, these are the stories that I think a lot of people may or may not know.
All right,
that,
sure.
That if you dig deep into some of these events, and really this is part of what the Great American Story is about.
Right.
It's the things that, these aha things, these
Yes.
amazing things. By the way, they did recover Booth's gun,
Yes.
and it's on display at Ford's Theater. You can go in, you can see it. It's behind glass.
Yes.
It's
It's just a tiny thing.
It is. It's a 45 Derringer, that single shot.
Yep.
And it's, apparently he dropped it on his escape, and they did recover it as evidence. A couple other interesting things is, we were talking about John Parker, the bodyguard.
Yes.
Do you know that he remained on the White House security detail after the assassination?
Are you kidding?
I am not kidding.
Wow.
He was charged with failing to protect the president, but
Okay.
but it was later dropped.
One of the things I highly recommend to people, of course, if you're in Washington, you want to go see Ford's Theater.
Yeah.
And by the way, they've turned that whole basement area is turned into a beautiful museum.
It is. It is beautiful.
And right across the street, I took this picture of the tower. It's supposed to be a representation of just a few of the 16,000 books that have been written about Abraham Lincoln.
Isn't that something?
Probably the most written about American of all time. And so many of these books are ones that we have enjoyed. Anyway, this is literally right across the street at the museum over at the Peterson House.
which is where he was taken after he was shot.
Correct. Now known as the Peterson House, but when I was a kid and we went there, it was simply known as the house where Lincoln died.
Isn't that something?
But, you know, I'm standing here, and you can see I'm standing with my grandkids, and I'm going to estimate, I don't know the exact number, but I'm going to say that's 25 to maybe 30 feet. Those are not real books. Those are like covers of books. But it just shows you the fascination that America continues to have with Abraham Lincoln. So I recommend going to Ford's Theater, going across the street to that museum, but also if you have the time, and I know it's a little more out of the way, but go to Springfield, Illinois, and spend a little bit of, you can literally walk into the house. It's been kept the same, like he had just locked the key in the door and walked away.
That's awesome.
One of the reasons I bring it up is I think he knew right from the start
You do.
that this could be something. Let me just give you a line here from his farewell speech to the people of Springfield. It was a rainy, I think it was a Saturday. The train was about to pull out, and he said, "My friends, no one, not in my situation, can appreciate my feelings of sadness at this parting. He then went on to say, "Here I have lived a quarter of a century and have passed from a young to an old man. Here my children have been born, one is buried. I now leave, not knowing when or whether ever I may return."
Wow.
And of course, he never got that chance.
A good ending.
Yeah, I
our
think
first
so. This is just the first of many, many episodes to
Yes.
come. And
Yeah.
so, Johnny, what do we want to do to make sure people can feel connected to the Great American
So
Story?
we've got an X page that we're just going to launch out of the gate as soon as this episode drops. So
Drop over there and give us your
the
feedback.
Great American Story, or at the story_Fox.
Well, I tell you this much, John. I was excited when you came to me with the idea, and we're just getting rolling. It's exciting to be at the very beginning of something like this, that we look forward to spending time with you guys, all the history lovers that are out there.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Ron. Appreciate it.
You bet, John.
Yeah.